Welcome to Business Owner Tales from the Trenches, the podcast for business owners who want to see around corners and thrive financially. Your host is Carr, CEO and business owner at CornerCap. Tune in every other week for lessons learned from the trenches of entrepreneurship, business successes, and financial independence. Here's Cannon.
Hello, welcome to the show. Cannon Carr, your host, and Claudia Bettinger, your producer, both of us here with you. Claudia, this is an exciting, original episode today. We get a chance to speak with an entrepreneur who is going to tell us all about how to capture and sustain that first mover advantage in what is really an incredible idea.
Absolutely. Today we have Paige Wilson on the podcast, who had a 20-year career as a finance executive, which ultimately culminated as managing director in corporate banking at Wells Fargo and SunTrust. She became an entrepreneur after her own experience in caregiving, when it became clear to her that there was a void of support options until home care or home health is warranted. From there, she created Naborforce, which uses technology to leverage the strength of our community to provide backup to caregivers. It's a great episode. I'm so excited for y'all to hear it.
It's great. So there are three things I think we highlight here as you listen to the show. The first is about timing. She'll talk a little bit about how she started this business and this idea, and then how she got third-party capital to accelerate it for scale. It is a technology platform, but by timing, I mean, everything has come together at an interesting time. And if they execute well and sustain a first mover advantage, this is going to be an incredibly powerful business.
Absolutely.
That is new to the space. So in space and elder care. So very exciting. Secondly, is about the mindset. Listen to her mindset about how she has built this business and how she has planned for it. In hindsight, the execution seems flawless, but it's never obvious at the time, right? When she's making those decisions, and she'll walk you through that. And the third to listen to in this program is just how to execute in what she calls that white space. And white space means, a new innovative idea that the market doesn't necessarily know exists yet.
Right. How
do you market in that space? How do you connect to your networks and build out customers and labor force? So fascinating insights there that I think you'll enjoy. Please sit back and listen to this episode with Paige Wilson. Well, Paige, thanks for joining the program. We'll get to Naborforce in just a second, but I know for the first part of your career, you worked in corporate finance and investment banking. Did you always view yourself as becoming an entrepreneur or founding a company?
Absolutely not. Now, most of my career was entrepreneurial-like, even though I was in large public companies for the most part. I was always building something, so that part was fun, until maybe investment banking. That was much more prescriptive. But, 14 years ago, I experienced a challenge with an aging mom. And, without going into the detail now, one thing led to another that all of a sudden I found the answer. I had been searching, dealing with this for my mother, and long after she passed away, all of a sudden it became clear as day to me what the solution was. And so I had no choice. I had to leave my career and do this.
So, and we'll get to that, but was that, since we're on it, was that like just a quick migration? You were like, you know what, this is mission driven in a way. I can see what the solution is. Let's not wait. Was that kind of the mindset?
Pretty much. So I was working for Truist, and I was down in Atlanta a lot. But once this became clear, I started building a business model and really testing the assumptions on what I thought. And I had to do it. I absolutely had to do it. And they thought I was crazy at the bank. I had a great job and a great paycheck, but every now and then I look back, but there's no turning back. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, before we leave that prior life, how did that prepare you for what you're doing now, or did it not?
Well, I think maturity helped prepare me. I think that's one of the benefits. Many entrepreneurs are very young and bright-eyed and naive. At least I had several decades of work experience and kind of understood a lot of those pieces of it, because building a business as an entrepreneur is a lot more than just having a good idea. You have to have the good idea, but that's the easy part, to be honest. Building the business is very challenging. So while we are financed very differently than how I was working at large companies or as an investment banker, those were primarily very large, well-funded, profitable, public highly rated companies. We're the opposite of all those currently.
Yeah.
We are not profitable because we're in this high growth mode. We are funded by venture capital, but we're still very small, and we are certainly not investment grade yet. But we do see a path to profitability, which is another thing. I think some statistics that maybe 70% of entrepreneurs today have never even lived through a market correction because they were born after 2008.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
Which is crazy. I've lived through too. So, I also see the importance of really managing that cash and getting to that path to profitability.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, let's just spend a moment, go back to that when it did get started. I know you were taking care of your mom, and then it sounds like there was a little bit of time before you actually invested in and built the business. So, when did it dawn on you that you could build a business to serve elders with this kind of care?
Yeah, to go back a little bit. So I would say about 13 or so years ago, I was working in corporate finance at the time. And my mom, who was only in her mid-70s at the time, broke her hip. And she was otherwise in pretty good health. But all of a sudden, she started needing little bits of support. She couldn't drive for a bit of time. I lived 5 minutes from my mother. My dad died when I was younger. And so I was very close to my mom. And so I would help her with these things. It could be getting her to the beauty parlor, helping her sit up the bridge table. The one that probably put me over the edge, and I smile about it now, was calling me at all hours of the day and night to reprogram that dang remote. I'm like, Mom, I cannot drop everything. And I had this big career. I was raising a teenage daughter because I was widowed very young as well. And so it was a lot. And I could tell that she wouldn't even ask me for all the things she really wanted help on because she didn't want to be a burden on me. She knew I already had a lot of my plate, and I hated seeing that. I wanted her to continue living this big, full life of joy, I called it, because she was wide open crazy. And so I started looking for a resource to help me to help her, since I knew I couldn't be there all the time and she was hesitant to ask. And what I quickly found out was there really was nothing. Either you have your family, like me, or some friends and neighbors that might be able to help you with little things. And then there was this big gap. And then you get to home care, aides and nurses, Home Instead, Visiting Angels, care.com. She ultimately needed that level of care, but she certainly did not need that for this period of time that she relied on me. Yeah. She didn't need somebody coming in scrubs for 4 to 8 hours, babysitting her and bathing her. She needed somebody, to.
She was still active for the most part, right? I mean, she could move around. Yeah.
Yeah. And we all start to need a little help. Well, we all need help at every age, but so there was this giant void, and I just realized, I don't have anybody else to ask. My brother on occasion, but it really did fall on me. We got through it. She eventually did have home care. Then she was on hospice care for an extended period of time, and that level of care was great when she needed it. And there are a lot of options. Right. After she passed away, that period of several years had taken so much out of me that I needed a clean break. So I moved cities, changed jobs. And that's when I joined SunTrust, now Truist, in Washington, D.C. And it was great. Loved my job. But I was in a new community and, I felt a little bit isolated. I saw my friends back in Richmond. All of my peers were now going through what I had experienced. And you don't really understand what it is until you're hit with it. And it's not a bad thing. It's great to help our parents, but it's hard. And so I don't know what compelled me to start looking into the demographics, but I started learning about this age wave where you have 11,000 baby boomers turning 65 every single day.
Yeah.
And I'm one of them. I'm the very, very, very tail end. But not only that, the statistic that really opened my eyes was we have the number of people over 80 is tripling in the next 3 decades, but the number of family members available to support them is dropping in half.
Oh, wow.
Families are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's not even taking into account that many move away. They're sandwiched, much like I was. So that was a big eye opener. So I'm here in DC, kind of missing my friends back in Richmond, but enjoying the break. And I thought, well, I'd like to do something to get involved in the community. I was always very active in Richmond. So I said, maybe I'll do Meals on Wheels. It's a great organization. I have a soft spot for older folks. It's not a big commitment. And they were very excited when I reached out, but they wanted me to commit to the same day every week. Hey, would you like to do Wednesdays or Fridays? But I traveled all the time. I really didn't have control over my calendar, and they needed more of a commitment. So that didn't work out. And that was disappointing. And I would say 3 weeks after that, I was talking to a friend of mine back in Richmond. She used to be a lawyer. And she said she was driving for Uber a few afternoons a week. And I thought, what in the world? I didn't think that she needed the money. And what she said was, Paige, I left my law practice several years ago to finish raising my 2 boys. They were teenagers at the time. Now they've gone off. One's out of college, one's in college. And I wake up in the morning and I feel like I have no purpose. I'm used to taking care of people, and I don't want to go back to my career. That's done, she said. And she said, I really don't even want a part-time job, because even if it's part-time, it's not that flexible. I still have to commit to a schedule. And she said, what I love about Uber is that if I have an afternoon free, I can go out and connect and talk to people. And that literally was the light bulb. I mean, clear as day, because I thought, wait a minute, I bet there are a lot of people like her or like me that if they could do it when it fit in their busy schedule, they could pop in for an hour or two and do those little things that our parents need, like a neighbor would do, like a son or a daughter would do. And that was it. Obviously we need to drive this through technology, but I had this theory that there were this vast untapped network of empty nesters and retirees. And that's what Naborforce does.
Well, it's powerful. So you've done enough research to know that the problem was sizable, right? And not going away. You had firsthand experience with that, and you found a workforce that could, in its own way, connect because of technology.
Absolutely, and I did a lot of surveys and research, asking that age group, would you be interested in doing something like this? And it seemed pretty evident. So I built a business plan. I did my first PowerPoint presentation that I've ever done, because I used to have people who had people who had people.
Right now, you have to do the work.
I still have it. Yeah. Anyway, and flew to Atlanta after I collected my bonus, and resigned and launched Naborforce, and spent the summer building kind of an MVP of tech platform to test it out. And that was in the summer of 2018, and launched in the fall of 2018. Had neighbors, that's what we call the helpers, because they are neighbors. We match in proximity, and clients, paying clients the very first month. And we were connecting them in this somewhat Uber-like manner.
So how did you build that technology platform quickly? It sounded like you got that done in 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, well, I did learn. I joined a startup community here in Richmond. There's an even bigger one in Atlanta and really budding, but this was all new to me, right? Prove it out with your minimum viable product. So luckily for me, I wasn't a software developer, and I didn't have the money to hire any because I was bootstrapping. But what I learned was there was some open source software that regular people can build little mini tech platforms, and it was enough for me to test it. And so we operated on that platform for about 18 months. And from the client side, it felt very technology based. Now, the reality was I was kind of Oz behind the curtain making some of this happen, but they didn't know that. And after about 18 months, we started raising capital and went out and built kind of the enterprise solution. But it was actually good, because during that 18 months, it helped inform me on what to build, because now I had seen what is valued on both sides of this market and how I should build that. If I'd built it day one, I probably would have not built the right thing. So
So it was an iterative process, but it sounded like you were able to avoid potholes or mistakes along the way. And how was that? Just good advisory team, or just enough experience to where you could judge your way through it?
Oh, there's been plenty of little potholes, but only a couple big ones. The path is not straight, but for the most part, and this is pretty amazing, I have this framed back here, but for a startup to have been in this for 5 years, we have not pivoted. We are doing exactly what we set out to do, because it's so clear that there's this big white space of a void for all these families looking for just a little bit of help for their aging parents, and it's only growing, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So I wanted to go back. You'd mentioned you were bootstrapping at first, and before you got the private equity support. How tell us a little bit about that bootstrapping? Or you just because you weren't having paid customers at the time either, right? Not yet.
We did have, well, until we
month
launched.
one, but
And it wasn't very much revenue, by the way.
Yeah.
So, I wasn't paying myself. And even though we've raised a lot of venture capital, we are still very judicious with that capital too. We're making sure that every dollar we're putting to, the best ROI. And so it took a while when I started hiring a team that people realized, no, we're not going to go out and buy all this flashy stuff. We're going to really dive in. And most theories would tell you that founder-led growth makes sense in the beginning anyway. We weren't spending any money on advertising. It was a lot of word of mouth, boots on the ground, kind of, I call it guerrilla hand-to-hand combat to get these clients and neighbors on the platform.
Well, did you have a group of angel investors alongside you, though, or just self-funding it and reinvesting from any proceeds you had?
Yeah, self-funding it, like I said, for about 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now you're 5 years into it, and often ask, has it gone as you originally expected? And for the most part, you've said yes. Actually, at least on the business itself, it has. But I'll ask. I mean, has it gone exactly as you expected 5 years ago?
Well, everybody told me that it was really hard, and I knew that it would be really hard. I had no idea how hard it was going to be. Yeah.
Right.
And part of what's hard for us is that we are in a true white space. There is nothing in the market that does this. Now, some communities might have a small mom and pop that's a group of 6 women in their 60s who love to go help people for 8 hours a time, that kind of thing. But on this scaled basis, I mean, we're doing hundreds of visits a day across all of our markets, people popping in here and there. So it's very difficult when you're in a white space because the people who need us don't even know that we're a solution. They don't even know that there's an option. So if they've got parents that need a little bit of support, for the most part, they think, well, gosh, I'm just going to have to bridge this until my mom needs a home care company. And so it's getting in front of them. Another challenge we have is that often the children are not in the same market as their parents. So we might find the children, but their parents live somewhere else or vice versa. That gets easier the more markets we open, for sure.
So, not having advertising dollars to spend, at least initially, raising visibility, it was important and obviously a challenge. Well, were there any times along the way where you were like, even though you haven't had to pivot the business model, you were like, I don't see how we're going to make it, or any moments of doubt?
There was one huge moment of doubt, and that was March 13th of 2020.
Oh, yeah.
And
okay.
we were up to 4 employees. We had just leased some real office space and COVID hit. And it was very clear immediately that we had to shut down, at least initially. We had to furlough everybody. And it was the day that I would have been making a big fat bonus had I been back in investment banking, by the way. But that's not that was a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, because I'm thinking, there's this imbalance of older people in the world. And is COVID the way of righting that imbalance? Because that's what we thought in the very beginning. So that was a bit scary. But personally, what was the hardest part of that is the fact that our whole raison d'etre, our value prop, is the fact that we are connecting with seniors, older adults in their home, helping them stay independent and stay connected. Because at the core of everything we do, it's that companionship piece, the connection. And all of a sudden, we couldn't do that. And this is when the seniors need us the most. But we couldn't go there. In the beginning, you thought you could get COVID from a grocery bag. So we certainly could not send neighbors into seniors' homes. So our revenue dropped about 94% in March and April. We considered a pivot to virtual offerings and decided, you know what, that is not the core of what we do. There are answers for those. You can buy a robotic pet. You can hire Instacart to bring your groceries. That is not our true value prop. And so we kind of waited it out. Like I said, we just slashed all of our expenses.
So you basically, you just went into hibernation mode.
Yeah. It gave us a chance to apply to Techstars, which was a big feather in our cap, because now I had time. I couldn't run the business. So we did get into the inaugural Techstars cohort for aging longevity, which was great. But, it was about 2 months. It was long before the vaccinations had come out. But
Yeah.
we definitely had families and seniors saying, please, please, I need you. I've been so isolated.
More than ever. Yeah.
And so our neighbors got masked up and gloves and the whole 9 yards and started serving clients again. So it turns out, as hard as that was at the time, it's actually been a catalyst for our business, because in the beginning, we knew we were providing all these little bits of help, but we knew the reason our business was so sticky is because of these connections being formed. And by the way, it's not just the seniors who are lonely. All of our neighbors, they're primarily empty nesters and retirees. They're craving connection too.
Yeah.
They've left the workforce. Their kids are gone. Our average neighbor is 55 years old. So before COVID, nobody really wanted to talk about loneliness or isolation. It sounded sad and depressing. There's been lots of discussion about that now on both sides.
Well, it sounded like during that period of you consider pivoting, but you had pretty good resolve, to stay with the model. Did you have a board of directors or a team of advisors that you could tap to kind of help you see around corners as best you could?
Yeah, we had not raised any venture capital at that point. So, most of it was gut. And I tell people all of the time, and I'm a grammar Nazi, but, it was so clear then that we had to succeed. We had to get through this. I would say we can't not make it. We have to make this work, because we see every day, it's not just the seniors counting on us. We're providing such peace of mind and backup to their families. So typically for every senior on our platform, there are 2, 3, 4 kids or more. And then on the neighbor side, and that's probably been the biggest surprise of the business, is that we know the clients really appreciate the help and the connection, and the families love the backup. But the neighbors, we think, of all of the stakeholders, get the most out of it. They say it all the time.
That's amazing.
I spend 2 hours with the senior, and it's made my day better. It's really cool.
Oh, that's such a great feedback loop. Then the workers making it happen are the ones who feel like they get the most out of it.
Yeah. I tell people all the time that lots of times organizations have to really work hard around culture and instilling their why in their workforce. Not a Naborforce. Every single neighbor, and they're thousands, they're independent contractors, they come with their own why built in. When they apply, they have to write a paragraph about why they want to be a neighbor. And every single one, it's so heartwarming. So
yeah, that's amazing. When you look at the market you've been in longest, I guess Virginia, you've been there since 2018. Is that profitable at this point, or you're still getting scale?
Yep. The Richmond market on a standalone basis is absolutely profitable. But because we are a technology company at the core, there's a lot of expense of overhead built around building this platform. And that's why it needs to scale to cover, the infrastructure. But that is the goal, obviously.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the end game. So where does this ultimately hit? I mean, what is success defined as? And I think there's probably 2 dimensions of that. One, that mission, touching lives like you're doing. And then secondly, the financial engine. So what is the definition of success? What does the end game look like?
Well, they're probably one and the same, because our definition of success is to become a trusted national brand. First, could be international. This is not just a U.S. problem. But that is absolutely our big, hairy, audacious goal. And we all believe that. We want to bring joy across the U.S. We're only in 8 markets now, but that will start to change quickly. And in doing that, there is a lot of opportunity. Now, are there a lot of potential purchasers that make sense? There's none that really jump out, because we're not a healthcare company, although we're adjacent to healthcare. So there's a big value there. We have all these people on our platform, the seniors, and then the adult kids and the neighbors, which is the next generation of seniors, not too far behind. We're going to own this, right? And so for a healthcare company or anyone that's really looking for that, there's a lot of value there. But, Rover went public, and now they just went private again last week. So that is certainly one of the opportunities that we look at.
So when you started this 5 years ago, did you have this ambitious national brand in mind? Because you said, the problem presented itself. You're like,
absolutely. It doesn't work as a lifestyle business, and it doesn't work as a regional play, at least given the level of technology investment we need to make. So We are a little bit like Uber of help for your parents. Now, we never explain it that way to families because that sounds scary, Uber.
Yeah.
But the technology is somewhat similar. And I would argue that our technology is more difficult because you're not picking up a visit. It pings your phone and you go right now. Most visits are scheduled a few days in advance, but neighbors can change their schedules around all the time.
Did the VC firms or the private equity firms, did they see the vision as quickly as you did? I mean, that was kind of sold itself in a way.
Yes, they did. And, when we raised our opening slide was we're solving a real problem for real people. This is not the latest mattress or away suitcase or, a nice to have. This is a real problem. And then when you look at the demographics, it's only growing. One of the things that we point to is our bottom-up analysis. And I did this before I quit my job because I read that the value of unpaid family caregiving in the U.S. is over $500 million, right? Billion, whatever. Well, that's a little hard to get my head around. So I said, let me take Richmond, Virginia. And now these are just assumptions, but it kind of frames it. In Richmond, there were 1.3 million people. And of that, 240,000 were over 65. That's not my target market. Most people over 65 don't need it yet. And by the way, I'm not that far away. They don't need it. But although a friendly hand, I could use a friendly hand getting my Christmas tree in the stand and those kind of things. But and not everybody can afford it. It is private pay. It's not a healthcare offering. So I did a bunch of cuts on income and a bunch of cuts on age and so forth, and came up with a target of 22,000, which is less than 10% of the total.
Right.
And then I said, well, what if those 22,000 people look for 4 hours of help a week? We're not talking about much. And it's $30 an hour. So we're not talking about a lot of revenue in or on their side. And I picked 4 because that was about what would have helped me. Once or twice, helped my mom for an hour or two. Turns out that there was a study that says 4 hours of outside help can relieve caregiver burnout.
Yeah.
And ironically, we've been operating for 5 years. Our average client uses us 4 hours a week. Go figure. Now.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Some use us very, regularly. Some use us less regularly, but on average, it's 4 hours a week. But back to the math, 22,000 seniors times $30 an hour times 4 hours a week is a $137 million opportunity in Richmond, Virginia.
Just alone, yeah.
Is that the right serviceable market? I don't know, but that's one tier 2 market. So it's very easy to see markets stacked up and grow that revenue very quickly.
So how, and we could spend all day on this, just fascinating, but you're in 8 markets, you kind of indicate you're going to continue to grow fast. How, just quickly, how many markets you want to be in the next 5 years, and how do you choose those markets, and how do you prioritize that growth?
We look at a lot of things on the markets, and at some point, and at the tipping point is probably 15 or 20 markets. At that point, we probably won't be releasing geo by geo. We'll just open up nationally, and it could be sooner than that. But each market that we're in today, we've looked at certain attributes to test it. Smaller markets, adjoining markets, different locations, north of the Mason-Dixon line, in the South, outside of the South. We look at things like we call it the age dependency ratio. What are the relative number of potential neighbors to seniors? Because there are some markets that skew very old or very young. And so balancing the marketplace could be an issue. We haven't seen that yet. Our fulfillment rate is over 98%. So, and that includes people calling in the morning or booking a visit online at 10 a.m. because they have a last minute doctor's appointment, and we can be there in 2 hours. They get filled. Most of them are filled ahead of time, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Let's just pivot last part of this to just to yourself. I mean, this is mission driven. You are changing lives in the community. What have you learned about yourself in this process?
Well, I say that, I have a brother. He was always the kind one. I don't really have a great caregiving gene, I thought. I was a finance person, much like my father, but it definitely has tapped into a different side of me. There's no question about it. And while it's by far the hardest thing I've done, it's the most fun thing I've done. And some days the least fun thing I've done, all in the same day.
Yeah, no, love it and hate it at the same time. When you have looked to build out the team, then what skills have you looked to add to it that you realized you needed to fill in because you didn't have the skill or the time?
Yeah, we continue to identify those key players of the team. The first one that I brought in, obviously, was a senior technology leader
Mhm.
because we are a tech team.
Mhm.
And then we've got a chief community officer, which is in many ways it's sales, because
Mhm.
for the most part, until we brought in somebody recently, but it has been this grassroots selling, building community, and we're building community on both sides, neighbors and the clients. Word of mouth still, even though we have recently started spending a lot of money on marketing, word of mouth is still number one. And we believe that as we build out this network, that gets even stronger.
Mhm.
When we were in Richmond, somebody would hear about Naborforce and say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. My parents live in Charlotte.
Mhm.
Then we go to Charlotte and these people say, oh my gosh, this is so needed. When are you going to be in Atlanta? Right. So, but that word of mouth is very, very strong. And it makes sense.
Mhm.
It's a trust-based thing, right? You're
Yeah.
sending people into your parents' home. And that is probably the biggest objection we have to overcome.
Mhm.
What I'd like to tell them, and we can't really say this outright, is our neighbors are the safest people coming in your parents' home because
Mhm.
they've all been thoroughly vetted. They're intrinsically motivated. They're not in it for the money. Yeah. Did you vet the cleaning lady? Did you vet the electrician who came over to fix the dryer? Did you vet, the church volunteer?
Yeah.
I don't know, and so our neighbors are amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Well, so, I'd love to hear. I mean, so in many respects, it's gone so well, although obviously very hard and difficult. I mean, is there something you would have done differently, knowing what you know now, that would have either accelerated the process or avoided extra spending that you didn't need to
Yeah.
do?
We're learning and failing every day, but that's the great
Mhm.
thing. Fail quickly, learn, and move on. Luckily for us, we haven't had any major failures. I would say probably getting the right people at the table a little sooner would probably be helpful. And maybe that's holding into our capital a little too tightly. Make that investment ahead of time before
Yeah.
you start bringing in a few of these key roles. We did a lot of growing out in the market. And the neat thing is we've now learned, I think we needed to do that to learn that we can centralize most of these functions. So most of
Mhm.
them are centralized in Richmond. That's a big piece of it.
But one other question too, just the advisory side, so important. You mentioned a board of directors. When in the journey did you realize that was going to be the right thing to add?
Yeah, so I never really had a true advisory board until we raised venture capital. I had plenty of ad hoc mentors that I would seek advice from, and they ran the gamut from people I'd worked with in business, people in the community that I've been introduced to, other entrepreneurs, absolutely. And I'll never forget, it was a great quote, but another entrepreneur that I used to get some mentoring from told me early on that he had been told by one of his investors that today is the easiest it gets. And you have to let it sink in. And then I thought, this is 3 years ago. Surely it's got to get easier. No, it just keeps getting harder. It's like they say, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. Everything gets magnified. The larger you get, the bigger these challenges are. But you're only thrown at you what you need, what you can handle at the time, I feel like. And as they get bigger, you've got a better team supporting you. Now we've got this board that's supporting us. So we've got lots of great people to help us navigate it.
Yeah. I often like to ask, what is that best advice you've ever gotten? And it sounds like maybe that's it. Today's as easy as it gets, helps you with the mindset. I mean, is that the best advice you've gotten?
I don't know
Is there
that
anything
that's
else that comes to
the
mind?
best advice I'd ever gotten, but a lot of it is around just being tenacious. This is the opposite of what you just asked me. But when I talk to young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs, what I tell them, and I think this is what keeps me going, is if you're doing this to make a lot of money only, stop right now. It's going to get too hard. It absolutely is going to get too hard. The only way you have any chance of success is being just doggedly driven at what the purpose of this venture is. You've got to wholeheartedly want to solve this problem. Just blinders on, nothing else. Like, you can't get distracted.
That's what keeps you going in those late night moments of doubt, right? Or where it's just too hard.
Absolutely. And, there is plenty of self-doubt all the time. And I'll get people that'll say, why do you think you're the person that figured this out? I don't know. I didn't set out to figure this out. but it became so crystal clear that this is what we needed to do. So I'm the person to do it, at least for now.
Yeah. Well, the idea is in great hands, and you're building something with your team that is transformative. I mean, few people get to really have the impact of changing lives and the quality of life like you're doing. So it's such a great story.
All of our employees know it. I mean, every employee, and we're up to 30 corporate employees, right? And then these thousands of neighbors, but every person here knows that they're helping to shape this company to change lives for years and years to come. So.
Yeah, that's great. Well, how can people learn more about Naborforce, particularly, and you're in 8 markets now, but how can people learn more? And if they want to help, if they want to bring Naborforce to their market, and be a neighbor, how do they get involved?
Oh, yeah. Drop us a note, at hello@Naborforce, but our website is naborforce.com, and it's spelled like labor force, but with an N,
right?
Because our labor force are your neighbors. That's where that came from. And our helpers are called neighbors, but there's lots of information there, and welcome to call.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to spreading your word and the story here, because there are people who do want to plug in and help, and it's just wonderful. Well, Paige, thank you so much for telling us about your journey, helping us see around corners from your experience. And the journey continues, right? I mean, let's visit again. Let's do another episode in 18 months and keep telling the story and see what else you've learned. But thank you for joining us today.
Yes. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Welcome back to the studio. Cannon and Claudia here with you. Claudia, I tell you, this was a high octane episode with a seasoned entrepreneur. Absolutely. Very exciting opportunity. We'll get into the 3 takeaways. There are lots of things to learn from this episode, but we'll summarize 3 of them. But first, what was your impression of this conversation?
I loved this conversation. My Nana actually uses Naborforce, and so to get to hear the mind behind it was really exciting for me and really interesting. We literally just used it on Christmas, and she always raves about them. So personally, I love the service. So it was super exciting for me to hear Paige's story in her own words.
Yeah, no, you've got a front row seat for that one. I know you found her inspiring too. What inspired you just a little bit about Paige's message? And
yeah, I mean, I think that it was super inspiring how she started her business later on in life. She had her entire banking career. And I also loved that this business comes from the heart. This comes from an experience that she had, and that she's using it to not only better her life, but the lives of so many other people. This is really something that helps caregivers. And so for her to use that as motivation to start a whole business off of it is just so inspiring and so impressive.
Yeah, no, you've summarized it so well there. And as a sidebar, this is a theme we're hearing constantly in our podcast episodes about seasoned executives starting a second career as an entrepreneur, and it helps them make more mature decisions. It helps them accelerate success. It's really cool. That's kind of an interesting theme we're seeing through there. Well, really, so maybe 3 quick things we'll highlight. The first one is around timing and that timeline from concept to scaling quickly for first mover advantage. And this podcast lays it out so beautifully. I mean, she spent many years doing deep research, as you kind of alluded to, built on firsthand experience, firsthand passion, learning there's a void, and doing deep research about this opportunity. And then when she launched it in 2018, she moved to what was really a low fixed cost model where they were bootstrapping. She used open source software to keep it cheap and prove the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and she was self-funding the venture. She wasn't paying herself. She didn't have an advertising budget. And, those are the moments that I think make or break a lot of entrepreneurs. And she definitely made the best of it.
Yeah.
To where she is now.
So proof of concept at that stage. And then she got third-party capital, and there the race is on, right? And now the challenge is not so much proving the idea, but more building the right team, having the right funding structure so that they can move from 8 markets now to probably doubling, in a relatively short time frame, be 15 to 20 markets she talked about being the tipping point, to ultimately moving to a national brand. And to me, it is all about that first mover advantage that high growth tech companies have.
Yep.
And that's why the timing, at so many levels is so important. So just so interesting to hear her words about that process and managing that timeline. Secondly, I thought we'd just highlight the mindset. She says the idea here, it's a good idea, is the easy part. Building the business is the hard part.
Right, exactly. And she says that some of the best advice that she got is that today is the easiest that it gets. And I think that really rings true for all entrepreneurs, that it's easier to do it today than it is tomorrow, than it is the next day,
Yeah.
and that you just need to get it done.
Well, and not only that, she kind of talked about, I mean, the bigger you get, doesn't that mean kind of the hardest decisions are behind you? No, that just makes bigger challenges, right? So I loved her mentor giving that quote. And the other quote I just heard from her, back in COVID, she said, "We can't not make it.
Right.
This is too good an idea. We can't have it not work." And it was just hearing that commitment, that mindset of believing in the mission, knowing that this is going to solve problems and change lives, keeps her going, even during that moments of self-doubt. And she said, by the way, I have self-doubts all the time, as all of us as entrepreneurs have that. The third thing I thought we'd highlight was just executing in what she called that white space. She says it's extra difficult to succeed in there. She talked about how the market doesn't know this service and even this need exists. Connecting buyers with the workforce, what the options are. People just don't know that what to look for. And she asked, how do you get in front of these people, right?
Right. Well, and, the geography of where the parents are versus the kids, it can be really difficult to reach them in both markets because most of the time they're disconnected or they're not communicating all the time. So how do you solve that issue is really a problem that she's facing.
Exactly. So you're getting to hear real time the decision making around building a business from scratch, bringing together key components to serve a market and educate that market. And they're growing by word of mouth. Once they get big enough, I'm sure the advertising budget will come. But it's educating and building and making aware. And what's beautiful is, as she articulates it, when people see the options there, it connects immediately. The labor force believes it, the elder care customer believes it, and it's a beautiful system. So very exciting time for this company and for Paige. We look forward to seeing in the next 18 months how it goes. Claudia, thanks for joining me on the program here, and we hope we will see everyone on the next one.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Are you looking for more resources to help your business? Visit cornercappodcast.com for our free ebooks to help you plan for inevitable transitions in your business. Tune back in every other week for a new episode.